Sorry to break the Anglo-Saxon dominance, being French and very Latin by my name, as you could see. I think I would probably agree some points that Edward put forward in the value of citizen engagement. I would probably be a little diverging with his views about the usefulness and the efficiency of EU. Anyway, I think this year of 2022 is a very existential year for Europe. Europe, as you know, has never been a sort of a linear development. It has ebb and flows of construction, disruption, going back and forth with, of course, nationalism growing. And at the same time, finally, after UK decided to leave, a big appetite to stay together, which is at least a value. And thank you for our English colleagues to have reminded us that Europe as a common project has a real value in face, of course, of the global turmoil. Of course, I'm talking from the point of view, of course, of a climate activist. So I am biased in favor of what the European Green Deal is. Even if, of course, as we discussed this morning, the element of how we conduct that transition, how we really ensure that there is a social justice element in that is absolutely central. And if not, it will not happen. But I am being that it's an historical moment for Europe. And even if Europe is a very small part of the global emissions, still Europe is a biggest for the moment, it will not stay for long, the biggest global market. And of course, has a soft power, at least in this dimension. And as Jeff said, I think this morning, the Chinese have been looking at Europe to make a move, not to the US, at least at that stage. Europe has been a first mover and a norm setter on the global stage on this particular topic, not on all topics, not on only this topic, but on this topic clearly. But of course, it's now challenged at home because now probably Europe is a first and only region who has not only indicate its global net zero emission goal by 2050, and of course, the more or less consistent goal of 55% of emission reduction by 2030, but display, of course, it has to be implemented, but the list of measures to get there, and they are tough, very tough measures. This minus 55% is a very high level. Of course, we can, as an activist, want more, but it will be very difficult to reach in now less than 10 years. Because we talk about leadership and healing, I would first add up the sort of macro lens to try to bring this concept together. It's interesting that Christine Lagarde, now the new ECB president, which I think she did when she was at IMF, referred to climate change as a macro-critical concern. And so what does it mean? It's not a sectoral thing. It's a transformational problem, involved major transfer of resources on a very new scale. And it's a crisis you can separate from debates on public finance in European capitals and Brussels. And that's the first time that we consider a trajectory of transformation that has to be cross-sectoral, and that has put the collective finance as a center. We see, by the way, the echo of that on the other side of the Atlantic, if I'm referring to Janet Yellen calls for braver spending and raising the debt ceiling, at getting more intense every day as the deadline approach, and we'll see what, of course, Joe Biden can obtain from that. So we are in a very crucial year because we are freshly in a post-Merkel Europe, but the interesting thing is in the German competition for power, climate change was one, if not the one, main element that the people were voting for. And even the conservative parties who were really against any climate action strong, and we saw that the impact, of course, on the policy all these years, now have to take a different stance. On the other side, France will preside the EU for the first half of 2022, and at the same time, in the meantime of the presidential election. So it's a very charged political moment. And I do think that that is really what is at stake, is what kind of Green Deal, what kind of really transformation, and what kind of healing, because it's healing on the restarting the economy and transforming the economy at the same time, which of course was difficult. It was a pure miracle, in my view, a political miracle, that in the midst of the COVID crisis, the Green Deal, which was of course decided before that, because of the new mandate of the Commission, was not abandoned. Europe is the only region where more or less 30% of the recovery funds, not only the European one, because that was a condition, but in most countries of Europe, a level, a quite relatively high level, less than 30% in average, has been going to green investment and green recovery in these different countries. So the healing already has a nuance that to go in the green direction, which I think, in my view, it was so simple, it's so easy to say back to normal. I'm not saying that we are not going back to normal, but I'm saying that the inflection point has gone. And it was, from my point of view, a good surprise. So the Macron-Merkel pact of the EU recovery plan has this component, and it was not a given. The second element is there's a vision, which is an historical one, of course, as we mentioned, reminding us this morning about the Greek crisis, that the common borrowing and transfer is a new turning point. And I don't think we can go back. And again, it was interesting to see that within the German election, no voice said that we have to reopen this discussion, even if the austerity and of course the debt management will come back immediately, and I will come to that later. Mm-hmm. So now we have accepted, even the German board members of the ECB, that ECB has to have a climate mandate. It's an historical turn point as well. So, and of course that will, and the Next Generation EU Fund more firmly anchored the EU Green Deal at the heart of the European project, combines the RFF, meaning the Recovery and Resilience Fund, plus the multilateral fund framework funding, is creating a new space for finance in Europe. This lays the groundwork for a profound transition. It needed 70% of the energy in Europe is fossil fuel based, relying on massive imports. We see the consequences these days with the gas. And the EU Green Deal expects a huge pivot in the next decade alone. And that will be a very big battle. We see that already, as we know, the electricity prices linked to the high price of gas is reopening the discussion on the renewable energy, but we will face that all the time, and it's natural because it's a very long transition. We have, of course, a reskilling enormous challenge, and we talk about coal at different moments of the discussion today, but we have to think about automotive and many other sectors that will really be profoundly affected by the transition. And everything is how the European government face the anxieties of the European communities, not only the workers, but the region and the local communities. And in my view, this is really a very interesting exercise for democracy. I'm taking the example of Spain, which I think I'm very admirative about. Before closing the coal mines, before closing the thermal coal-based power plant, the Spanish government is preparing the transition before doing that. I think that's totally the way associating the community with the transformation of the activities, getting the fund in advance is, in a way, the good way to respond to the general trend we have to develop. At the same time, the association of the citizen and the local authority to the transformation. And I'm sure this is an experience that is, of course, stayed in other ways. At the same time, the shapes the norms of the net zero economy, Europe is doing it. And of course, in a way, with of course trying to be clear and sincere of what does it entail to go to the net zero economy. Again, for the moment, when you look even at the US plan for 2030, even for 2050, or even the Chinese plan for 2060, the net zero, we still lack clarity of how the milestone where at least Europe has said how it intends to do it. There is a mandate for bold climate action in Europe from the citizen. We have done recently, very recently, survey in 7 countries, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Poland for the moment. And with a comparison with United States and the United Kingdom, in the majority of the European, the European Union countries, the majority says that government is not doing enough on climate and are showing broad support for policies such as a Green Deal. People see economic recovery program as an opportunity to shift norms on climate, tax, and wages. And there are an appetite for change. But in a way, and it, for me, this particular recent survey, in a way, struck me, in many of these 7 countries, 70, 65, 70% of citizens say we want a big change after COVID. And very few thought that was a possibility to have a change. So it's a gap in the hope. And I think that's where the healing part is really important, and the leadership. 70%, for example, in France, doubt that many things will change in our country after the end of the pandemic, while 70% wants it. So this go back to many examples that, and we have now many instruments and many ways that the citizens are taking the Green Deal as a project they can own and they can fight for. Legal advocacy shows the way. The EU leaders can worry of the social backlash, but often it is the citizen-led activism, including in the courtroom, Karlsruhe, Conseil d'État in France, Netherlands court against the government. So there is mobilization of the citizen. So I would, because I have very few minutes, and because Edward was talking about people want to be recognized and listened to, I would make 3 recommendations for EU. One, as I mentioned this morning, we need to bring Green Deal at home and have a national and local definition of what the Green Deal is, because it's a transformation for the next 30 years. Second, and so we need the clarity of the trend and the pathway. We need to speak the truth of what we are doing and not pretend, not greenwash, nor the companies, nor the government. We have to create the space for the citizen to own that, and for example, keep space for social innovation, decentralized power, for example, campaigns, etc. And finally, on the macro level, we need a fiscal space for EU common goals funding. We need a tax reform, we need a new debt management, we need probably to take out the green investment, out the debt GDP ratio, even if we want to keep the stability pact, which I think has to be renegotiated. So we have letting community show the way to bureaucracy, not always the way around. Thank you.